What's the most important aspect of a gacha game? Now, I've played numerous different games, from Arknights to Genshin to Honkai to Punishing Grey Raven to Blue Archive, Azure Lane, Counterside, Art of Year Fusion, etc. And I've had different interactions both with the community on the YouTube side of things and directly, whether that be through Reddit, Discord, etc. And out of all of these, considering there are some that I've stuck with for very long periods of time and others that I occasionally come back to, I want to discuss what I believe to be one of the most heavy and key aspects of different games. Now, instead of saying there's one solid point, I do believe that depending on the game you're playing, multiple points or multiple different factors can come into whether or not you're going to continue playing the game long term or whether you're going to drop it soon after. For example, to me in Arknights, one of the things and features that I feel like it needs most is a much quicker or much faster auto deploy situation, because most of the time when you're watching auto deploy, unless you want to actively watch it, you don't really need to do anything. And when I'm just trying to spend my sanity because I'm overcapped, it is important to me to at least have a sweep function like with what Blue Archive, it does it, and you also have Azure Lane, which has a very similar feature in that you can tell it what you want it to do and it'll autoplay and you can do it in the background. You also have, I believe, Counterside has a similar feature as well, but I may be incorrect on that one. As such, I do believe depending on the gacha game you're playing, there are different circumstances in which you would value one aspect more than another. Azure Lane gives me so much oil that I have no hope of ever utilizing it. And as an example of that, there's a lot of content that I can participate in, but a lot of it I just don't choose to. Azure Lane is a game that I just occasionally come back to build up relationship and intimacy with certain characters, whereas Arknights is a game that I play much more in depth with the occasional issue of, I have a bit too much sanity that I don't feel like using as of right now. In terms of the most consistent games I play, you have Blue Archive, you have Genshin Impact, and you have Tower Fantasy and Arknights. Those are the ones that I pop between pretty often. In regards to my reasons why, Genshin Impact to me has the most full and cohesive experience in that there's a lot more I can do outside of just pulling and instance battles. Blue Archive allows me to have much more alternatives in terms of what I want to do. I can either focus on story, gameplay, or building my relationship up, and I also have decorating my cafe, which isn't really a big function, but it's still there. Arknights has a lot more thinking and a lot more strategy involved into the combat, in which case I may decide to level up and build up certain characters that I otherwise wouldn't, so it does take a bit more thought process for me to get through that game. All of these games are relatively successful, and as a result of that, the communities that they have are pretty big and pretty vast. I've mentioned numerous times my issues with the Genshin Impact community, but outside of that, Arknights and Blue Archive have expansive communities both on YouTube and Discord alongside Reddit, and Genshin has a pretty decent YouTube community if you just choose to ignore the comments. Let's be honest here, the gacha system in all of these games isn't exactly the best, and many of you may get lucky and may get unlucky, and depending on which side of that equation you are on, you either hate it or you love it. With that being said, overall there are two very important aspects that I want to discuss regarding each of these games. In Arknights, because the game already requires a bit more thought process and strategy in regards to laying out certain units, especially because if you pick them back up, you have to wait for their redeployment time. The difficult content and the harder content, whether that be from events or whether that just be the natural annihilation you can go through, I think that the difficult content in that game always brings you back because you want to strive for either better scores or easier clears. And it's because of that that you're more than likely going to interact with the community itself, because if you can't clear a stage or if you don't know who to build next, you're going to likely look on Reddit or on YouTube to ask for assistance or maybe ask for a guide. In which case, Arknights' difficult content brings you back to the game, and that difficult content also encourages you to interact with the community itself, which does increase your enjoyment overall, at least I found. Blue Archive has some difficult content, but it's not consistent enough to the extent to where you are going to pretty consistently come back to the game and look for more individuals to play with or more advice. Instead, the Blue Archive community has a very active art side of things, and as a direct result of that, I feel like you're much more inclined to maybe not play the game as much, but you are inclined to continue interacting with the community given similar tastes in perhaps characters or different tastes in live 2Ds. Maybe you're interested in one unit that's coming out in the future. For me, it's Summer Izuna, and I will be making a video on her when she drops. In Genshin Impact, you don't necessarily have difficult content. I know this. Why? Because I've been hoping for difficult content for a year, and I'm never getting it. So as a result of that, instead of having difficult content to look forward to and having the community to fall back on, you instead have to rely solely on events. And those events are pretty nice. The quests and story quests are decent as well. See, unlike Blue Archive and Arknights, the difficult content doesn't mean that there's an endgame. In Arknights, there's an endgame, and that endgame is the hardest stages of the contingency contract. It's the hardest stages of the actual game itself, of annihilation, of events. There's a lot more difficult content in Arknights at base than there is in other games. Blue Archive arguably encourages you because the setting and the environment that you're fighting in discourages you from using other units. So you're constantly building up a new unit, or you're constantly preparing for somebody else to come into your team and figuring out what works and what doesn't work for certain stages. Genshin Impact only has Abyss, and Abyss rarely changes, and the Abyssal buffs do, but not outside of that, nothing else is really forcing you to build up a new character because they don't really discourage you from using anyone. You're not at a heavy disadvantage if you use Animo, for example, which they really should do. As a result, the endgame in Genshin Impact is either event seeking or you choosing to build out every single character effectively. So then what is keeping you coming back? In Genshin Impact, it's the fear of missing out. You don't want to lose out on this event exclusive weapon or this event exclusive Primogems or the item in your teapot or this random banner. So instead of utilizing mechanics and gameplay, Genshin instead uses events and missed opportunities. You can see somebody running around with and using a weapon that you don't have, or getting a character constellation that you don't have the opportunity to, especially if you skipped out on that event. I have never felt like I'm missing something by not playing Blue Archive, by not playing Arknights, by not playing Azur Lane, because I can come back to those games. But in Genshin, if I don't come back, I feel like I'm missing out on either an event, rewards, or something that's a lot more impactful to my overall account than in these other games. So which one of these is the best? I think the best way to go about it is probably the Arknights methodology, in that there's endgame content which is always available, and as a result there's so much content and so much story that you can really push through for a long period of time before you reach that pinnacle point. Arknights also has arguably a better and more rewarding gacha system than any of these other games, because in your first 10 pool you're guaranteed at least something decent. Even if you don't use the unit, you can't necessarily debate the rarity of that unit. To me, as of right now, there's so many good gacha games and so many different gacha games that finding one that appeals to you isn't necessarily the difficult part. The difficult part is sifting through all of the other ones that you don't like. There are popular ones, and there are ones that you may enjoy briefly and come back to, but the difficulty is I don't want to download all those games on my phone or my iPad or my computer and then never play them. So I think that it's very important to find a gacha game that sticks to you, that you like playing. It doesn't necessarily mean the gameplay has to be the most complex. That means the character you could like. You could enjoy the feel and style or the music. Let's be honest, most gacha games have amazing soundtracks. And for me, I found my three: Arknights, Blue Archive, and Genshin. I've covered these games a lot and I talk about them a lot because I play them the most. And I do think the communities of these games have a large impact. Let's be honest here, a lot of individuals have negative opinions of the Genshin community despite not playing the game, because you hear a lot about what they've done. The same can go for the Arknights community, the same can go for the Blue Archive community. If you look at the Blue Archive characters and the art and you kind of make that association, then you may have a negative opinion of that community. The same goes for Arknights as well. So don't get me wrong, the communities are important, but I don't think there's a community that outright can ruin a game itself. I think it's a lot more down to the game in of itself. What is the gameplay like? What are the mechanics like? What is the content gameplay loop? How many events are there? How are they, or how is the gacha system? What is the community like, etc.? There are multiple different aspects that come into it, and to form a perfect experience isn't really possible, but to find an experience that's good enough and a consistent and good gameplay loop is incredibly important. If I can fall back on a community for help, then I feel like that's a good game, because it encourages me to push harder, and instead of just giving up and saying, nah, not worth my time, I instead want to do better. And if that community is welcoming as well, then it's a really good feedback loop. I want to do better, I go to the community, I have a good time with the community, I do better, I go back to the community, vice versa. That cycle will repeat. But if I go to the community, have a bad time, don't want to push harder into content because the content is so difficult that it makes my account feel bad to the extent to where I don't want and not encouraged, or I'm not feeling that progress, then that's just bad design. I want to hear your opinions. What makes a good community to you? What makes a good game to you? And what's the most important factor of a gacha game in your opinion? My name is Shikai. If you've enjoyed the video, leave a like, subscribe, and I hope to see you next time. Goodbye.